Thank you, David. We're very pleased to have Professor Kathy, and I forgot to ask, is it Kiely or Kiely?
Kiely. It's Kiely.
Kiely. Okay, thank you. As our speaker today, she is the Lee Hills Chair in Free Press Studies in the MU School of Journalism. She will tell us about current threats to the free press. Kathy Kiely is a veteran reporter and editor with a multimedia portfolio and a passion for transparency, free speech, and teaching. After a long career covering politics in Washington, D.C., she moved into the classroom full time because she believes universities are the laboratories that will discover the formula for making fact-based journalism viable again. Professor Kiely has taught at the University of New Hampshire, American University, George Washington University, and Princeton. As the inaugural Press Freedom Fellow for the National Press Club's nonprofit Journalism Institute, Kathy organized events around free speech issues and advocated for journalists who have been jailed or threatened for their work, most notably Emilio Gutierrez Soto, a Press Club Award winner released in August of 2018 by U.S. immigration officials. Kathy's reporting and editing career includes editing for Bill Moyers and Bloomberg Press. She covered Congress and national politics for USA Today and was a White House correspondent for the New York Daily Times, among many other positions. She holds a bachelor's degree from Princeton University, a master's from American University, and was a Knight Fellow at Stanford. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here.
Great. Thank you very much. I will share my screen because I'm going to show you a slideshow. And so are you all seeing my slides?
Yes, that looks great.
Great. Okay. I'll first apologize if any of you were at the League of Women Voters the other night. I gave the same presentation there, so I apologize for that. There have been a few new developments, but this is a topic of interest to a number of people, which I'm glad about. I know that all of you are of the right generation, that you'll get this joke when I say, as the Free Press Chair, I'm like the opposite of the Maytag repairman right now. It is not a sleepy time on my beat, and so I appreciate that other people are interested in this. This is an unusual time, and I will say that really we are in this slide that I'm showing you, it could be really written about most presidents I've covered. You know, that there's always been an adversarial relationship between presidents and the press. That's kind of the way it's supposed to be. You know, we've had terrible fights in the press corps with even Barack Obama over the use of electronic surveillance to try to nose around press rooms, but we did reach an amicable agreement with that administration. So there's always been this tension, but it is, I think, most presidents have acknowledged, even if they're mad at the press from time to time, or even most of the time, they do acknowledge the important role that we play in our democracy, and that is a role that's been, why is this not working? Let me see. Different controls, sorry. That's a role that it's ingrained in our First Amendment. You know, we say that Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition government for redress of grievances. So, but that really, it's a negative. A lot of scholars point this out. This doesn't say what the press can do. What it says is what the government can't do, and that is to meddle with press freedom. And the reason for that, of course, is we are a check on power. And that's what our system of checks and balances is all about. And so most presidents have respected that. Most famously, this quote I'm sure you've heard. I got this from Monticello, which is the definitive Thomas Jefferson repository. There are a lot of fake Thomas Jefferson quotes floating around there, so I always like to check mine. But in this quote, the last part of the quote is the one that we journalists cherish, which is, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would not hesitate for a moment to prefer the latter. So Jefferson certainly understood that, one of our founders, and I think they all did. That's why James Madison wrote the First Amendment. And of course, it is not new that Donald Trump's a little bit different in so many ways. And really from the outset of his presidency, his first presidency, he has had difficulty with the press. As you can see, this piece, which was written by the very well-known and lauded journalist Marvin Kalb, was written in the first month of the first Trump administration. So we've known for a long time that Donald Trump has a different attitude toward the press than most of his predecessors. But I do want to diverge just for a minute, because Donald Trump didn't always dislike the press. And this is, I found this treasure trove in my former employer, the New York Daily News, one of the many papers I've worked for, really made a living off of covering the Donald, as he was known in tabloid parlance. And here's a series of front pages, or as we like to call them in tabloidies, the Wood. Donald made the Wood many, many times, as you can see, and mostly about his love life. And you can see the ups and downs. And so tabloids loved Donald because he gave them copy, and the Donald loved the tabs because he was a real estate developer and he really wanted to be a celebrity. And so he seemed to be living by the old P.T. Barnum, or at least this has been attributed to P.T. Barnum, aphorism that no publicity is bad publicity. And so he got a lot when he was in New York, wheeler dealer. And here, I just thought I'd add, this is not about Donald's love life, but here are two Daily News Woods from the 1999. And this was Donald's first foray into politics. And I thought it would be interesting for you to see that he was pretty close to Bernie Sanders back then when it came to his ideas for balancing the budget. So Donald definitely has some, let's say, some flexibility in his thinking. But at the time, in the 90s, when Trump was active in New York real estate and really trying to build his brand as a celebrity, he really had this symbiotic relationship with the tabloids. And in fact, Maggie Haberman, who is now a reporter for the New York Times and who is pretty widely known as the Trump whisperer, started out at the New York Daily News and then the New York Post. And that is really why, that's how she developed a relationship with Trump World that is still standing her in good stead today as a New York Times reporter. So this was a very close relationship. Going back, I just thought in 1999, this was right after Jesse Ventura, the World Wrestling Federation star, shocked the world by winning the governorship of Minnesota on a third party or an alternate party ticket called the Reform Party. And right after that, Donald, who seems to have always had a fascination with wrestling, thought that was so cool that he toyed with the idea of running for president on the Reform Party's ticket back in 2000, but then decided not to, got cold feet. So now he, of course, is a politician, and he's become much more thin-skinned about in his relations with the press. And we saw this even before he was sworn in this time around. He sued the Des Moines Register for a poll that suggested that he was not going to win Iowa. That turned out to be wrong. He did win Iowa, and he went on, obviously, to win the presidential election. But after the election, he was still harboring such a grudge that he's sued the Des Moines Register and its pollster. So whoever saw such a sore winner. But anyway, there you have it. And then once he was sworn in, he began to upend some of the norms of the way Washington is covered. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that and why that's significant. So the 4 cases, there are many, many ways in which he's clashing with the press and interfering with press freedom, but I'm going to focus on 4 cases. One involves the Associated Press. The second involves Voice of America and its affiliate organizations, and then Corporation for Public Broadcasting and CBS. So these, in different ways, I think these cases kind of give you a sense of what his tactics are and what the implications are of these fights. So first is the Associated Press. Now, most people don't know what the Associated Press is, but you probably encounter Associated Press content every day of your life. The Associated Press is a news cooperative. It is a global news cooperative. So member organizations like the Columbia Tribune would make their copy available to the AP, and they then in turn can run AP copy. AP started right at the dawn of the telegraph age, right before the Civil War, and it's gradually grown into a multimedia organization that does television, radio, print, and of course photos that they send all over the world. And so what Trump has done is he has banned the AP from its traditional role in the White House pool. Now, what is the White House pool? It is not a swimming pool, although this is a little trivia for you. There is an actual swimming pool under the seats that you're looking at in the White House briefing room. And back when I was a reporter there, it was a little more scruffy, and you could actually reach down and lift up one of the floor tiles and look down into the empty pool. Now, the pool dated from FDR's administration. So, of course, as you know, President Roosevelt had polio, and so that was a way for him to get exercise. So he built this pool, and if you look at the dimensions of the briefing room, you can see it's kind of a perfect configuration for the chief executive to do laps. But and I think for a while under President Nixon, it was a bowling alley. So, but now it's the press room. And but that is not the pool we're talking about. The White House pool is a small group of reporters that go in to represent the larger press corps when the president does something in small quarters, like maybe he's doing a little briefing or having somebody in the Oval Office, or maybe he's going to Walter Reed Hospital to visit injured veterans, and you can't take 65 to 70 people into those kind of situations. So what you do is you send 2 print reporters, 2 wire services, a camera person, an audio person, and they gather up all this, all the notes and the material and share it with the rest of the press. The AP has always had a place in the pool. For most of us, we rotate, and it might be my turn if I'm working for the New York Daily News or the Houston Post, and then it'll be another couple weeks before it's my turn again. But the Associated Press is a wire service, and by the Associated Press's own estimates, 4 billion, that's B as in boy, billion people a day interact with its content, either radio, television, print, photos. So obviously they serve a lot of people. And so the White House Correspondents Association, which is what WHCA stands for here, has always made a place for the Associated Press, and then the other big wire service, Reuters, in its pool. And so I have to hand it to the Trump press people. The spinmeisters have done a fantastic job of spinning this story as this is all about a bunch of elite, whiny reporters worried about what seat they have in the White House briefing room. And having sat in those seats myself, I can tell you that there's some whiny self-importance that is not totally inaccurate characterization, but that is not what this fight is about. And so this fight is about whether the president can determine what you say or I say as a reporter, and whether the president can determine which reporters get to cover him. Now, what this is all about, and the White House has been quite upfront about this, AP is being punished because it does not refer to the Gulf of Mexico by the president's preferred name. The Associated Press publishes style books. I'm in my office, so I can show you one. This is the AP style book. We use them all the time. And this is what everybody looks at, say, oh, what's our style on numbers? What do we say? How do we refer to the president, et cetera? And the AP has not changed its style book to refer to that body of water as the Gulf of America, partly because our first loyalty as journalists is to our audience, and it would be very confusing to people. And so, yes, I will get to your question, Dave, in a second. And so that's why the AP is being banned. And so, interestingly, Dave has raised this question of, are there other news organizations that have been banned? And interestingly, initially, no. There are a lot of big name news organizations who participate in the White House pool, like Reuters, like the New York Times, et cetera, and they are not referring, very few news organizations have changed the name from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, very few. And yet Trump targeted the AP. Why? Well, he hasn't confided in me, but I think the reason is the AP, and the irony is the AP is about the furthest thing from an elite organization, as you can imagine. We in the news business view it as kind of like the Jeep of journalism, just the facts, ma'am, kind of stories, very workaday kind of journal. Really great. They have great reporters, but this is not edgy, out there, opinionated journalism. But the AP, as I say, it's the biggest news organization in the world, arguably. And so just like with academe, who is Trump going after? He's going after Harvard. Here he's going after the biggest news organization, because if you can go after the biggest dog and take them down, this is all about alpha dogs, right? You are going to win the battle. That's what I think this is. That's my surmise as to why he would go after the AP and not other news organizations. So the second part of this fight, it's not just about policing the language. It's about deciding who gets to cover the president. And that, up until very recently, was pretty much determined by reporters. And how did that happen? Well, this is a picture of the House of Representatives. And it might surprise you because this is an institution that's as much maligned as journalism. But back in the 19th century, Congress did something very far-sighted and interesting. The 19th century, as some of you may know, in the late 18th century, as the press was developing in this country, most news organizations were attached to political parties. So most journalists were political hacks. But after the Civil War, that started to change. particularly as advertising became a really important means of making money. And so in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is when the Missouri School of Journalism, the first school of journalism in the world, was founded, the press was beginning to professionalize. And with the rise of the telegraph, it was able, ordinary people in their homes, wherever they lived in the United States, could get pretty instantaneous dispatches about news that previously had been the precincts of powerful people. We could now find out about decisions about war and politics and diplomacy and very quickly. So more and more reporters started to come to Washington, and Congress was trying to figure out what to do with all these reporters and how to make some space for them in the Capitol workspace, and then who was going to run this thing. And Congress, God bless them, decided they shouldn't run the press room because then it would look like they were spying on reporters. So they created a press gallery, and the gallery was run by something called the Standing Committee of Correspondence, which exists to this day. I've served on it. You serve for 2-year terms. You're elected by your peers, other accredited reporters at the Capitol. And you do a lot of things to help kind of keep things moving along and run interference between reporters and the politicians. But one of the most important things that committee does is decide who gets a press credential. And mostly what we're looking for is, are you really a reporter or are you a lobbyist in disguise? Maybe you say, well, I'm working for the Widget International, and that turns out to be a newsletter of the American widget manufacturer, so you're really a lobbyist. So that's what that is all about. And the press, the Standing Committee of Correspondence, polices these spaces. This is a picture of the Senate Press Gallery. There's also a House Press Gallery. There's a TV Press Gallery. There's a bunch of these little rooms in and around the Capitol where we have space to work. And sometimes the lawmakers will come in and do interviews there, et cetera. Until really the George W. Bush administration, in order to get a White House press pass, you had to have a Capitol Hill press pass. And then that, once you were in the White House press corps, a lot of the rules about how people behaved in the press room, who got to be in the pool, how the pool rotation worked, that was run by another group of elected reporters called the White House Correspondents Association. So it was pretty much controlled by the press. Now, under the George W. Bush administration, the White House started to let in some bloggers, and guess what? They were bloggers who tended to be sympathetic towards the then president. And that created some, and I remember writing columns about it at the time, that this shouldn't be permitted, but it was. And now what you have is the White House under Trump saying, we're going to run the whole thing. We get to decide. We get to decide who gets to come in. We get to decide who gets to be in the pool. So that means you're the person to go into the Oval Office. And, I've got to tell you that some of these organizations, I don't know if you pay attention to the White House briefing, but some of them are asking really embarrassing questions that basically amount to, tell me why you're so great. But again, Donald Trump was a celebrity. That is his hallmark. And celebrities are used to being able to pick the journalists who interview them and deciding what questions they're going to get asked and not get asked. The problem is that a president's not a celebrity. A president's a public servant. And the White House includes a private residence, but it is not a private residence. It is public housing. It belongs to you and me. So I don't think the temporary occupant of that house should be the person saying, you can come in, you can't, because that's really not his house. But I'm a free press advocate, so that's what you know. So this case is now in federal court. As you may know, the Associated Press has sued. The judge, in an initial determination, issued it, and this was a Trump-appointed judge, issued a temporary restraining order telling the White House they have to let the AP back in. So far, the White House has not done that, has not allowed the AP to participate in pools. And now what the White House has done, because they don't want to let the AP in, they've banned all the wire services from the pools. So the wire services are organizations that serve everyone else. And I really wonder, when the president travels, how they're going to put the pool together, because you have to pay to travel with the president. And I don't know that some of these little bloggers, as sympathetic as they are to the president, are going to have the wherewithal to pay to travel with him. And if they do end up traveling with him, I want to know who's paying for their ticket. Because that would be an ethical violation if they're getting paid for. But this case is winding its way through the courts. The AP has come back to the judge and is asking for further relief. And so that's where we're going to have to leave the AP for now. And I'm going to move to the next fight, which is Trump versus the Voice of America. And here I'm using Voice of America as shorthand for a constellation of news agencies that are operated by an umbrella group called the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And Voice of America is the oldest and probably the best known of those, but there's also Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Radio Marti, Middle East Broadcasting Network. And these are organizations that most news consumers in America have not heard of, because they're actually legally prohibited from broadcasting here, because they're funded by the government. And the idea is we don't want the government competing with private business. But where they do broadcast, and they were spun up to broadcast to countries that do not have a free press, so that they can get uncensored news. And I'm going to try to jump off here because I do have sound embedded, but the last time I tried to do this, it didn't work. But we first saw, let me just say that we first got a signal of what the Trump administration's intentions were in this tweet by Elon Musk on his own. It's now called X, but whatever they call those, X's or whatever. And he's saying, shut them down. Europe is free now. Well, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, those are all in Europe, and nobody listens to them anymore. Actually, more than 300 million people a day listen to these outlets, and it's just radical left, crazy people. And I think what happened here was that the Trump administration, even from the beginning, from the very first Trump administration, they did not understand the mission of VOA. And so I don't think this sound is going to work. So I'm going to try jumping off here and letting you listen to the first broadcast by Voice of America in 1942. And let's see if we...
Hier spricht eine Stimme aus Amerika. Aus Amerika im Krieg. Unsere Stimmen kommen zu Ihnen aus New York.
This is a voice speaking from America.
A voice from America at war.
Our voices are coming to you from New York, across the Atlantic Ocean to London, from where they are relayed to you in Germany.
Today, America has been at war for 79 days.
Daily at this time, we shall speak to you about America and the war. The news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth.
And that is really the calling card of Voice of America and its affiliate agencies. We shall tell you the truth. And what has made Voice of America credible, and I know this because I've traveled abroad and I've talked to people who listen to it, is the fact that it has never been U.S. propaganda. It has always been a First Amendment news organization that delivers honest, credible news. And shows America warts and all. So when we have a problem with civil rights, we report that on Voice of America or Radio Free Europe. When we have political debates in our own country, we report that. And that, to me, has always been made these kind of, this is part of soft power. This makes us credible overseas. People believe us. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has been trying to change that since the first Trump administration. What happened then was Trump was basically trying to turn it into Trump TV, you know, kind of like, here's why I'm so great. And that failed largely because Congress blocked him, including very conservative members of his own party. And they kind of slow walked things. So it wasn't until the very end of the Trump administration that people with what I would consider ill intent to breach the editorial firewall got into power. And by the time they really started to do some damage, you know, Trump had lost the election and Biden changed things back. But now you have 4 years to do this damage. And I think what the Trump administration, is kind of similar to what they did with the AP. Well, if we can't turn this into a broadcasting outlet that will magnify our greatness, we will shut it down. And the problem with that is, this is a piece by one of my favorite columnists, but I can still get things into USA Today, which is also one of my former employers. But I wrote this piece a couple weeks ago to point out that by shutting down these organizations, there are journalists the United States of America, recruited to work here so that they could broadcast in their native languages back home. And now their visas, if they are laid off, automatically expire. And these are people, some of them face imprisonment back in their home countries because they worked for Uncle Sam. And we're sending them back? I mean, some of these people have, this is in court today. This was in court again yesterday. And we are hoping for a decision today that will buy these journalists some time. But this is a nightmare. And there is a group of people, including me, who are trying to help these journalists out. But it is just, I covered Congress for many, many years, and I'm actually quite shocked that members of the Republican Party would go along with this. And it's very, very frightening for the journalists. You know, here's an example of somebody who got fired. This guy's really well known in Ukraine, and people are just crushed that they can't hear his reports anymore. I mean, VOA is totally silent. And that leaves the field open to Russia and China, et cetera. So Voice of America, also like the AP, has won a decision in court. But again, the Trump administration is fighting this. And I would expect you'll probably see some news in the next, I hope, 12 to 24 hours about the latest round of that court battle. But in the meantime, you know, there are these journalists living in limbo and just terrified. And some of them have families and, you know, they're people, they're human beings. So Radio Free Europe also won a case, but they're still having to fight. Every month they have to fight to get their money from the Trump administration. The Open Technology Fund, by the way, is a fund that allows us to end around jamming by Russia. Why would we want to close that? So now, and I'll go more quickly now. You're probably familiar with this. We learned recently that just this week that the White House is planning to ask Congress to actually rescind funding that it's already voted on for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which, as you know, funds the National Public Radio and public broadcasting system. What would that mean? Well, for us here in Missouri, in mid-Missouri, this would mean a 10% cut to KBIA's budget. That's a pretty big hole to put in the budget of an organization that relies very heavily on donations from people like you. And it would put a real crimp in the kind of teaching we can do at the Missouri School of Journalism. You know, working with students like this requires money. I am putting more money aside from my chair budget for KBIA this year because this is the kind of work we do. This is a story that won a Murrow Award last year for KBIA and our students. And it's a podcast, a series that we did called Canned Peaches. And full disclosure, my chair provided some money for that. But this was a podcast about people who raise food and produce food in Missouri. Pretty radical leftist stuff, huh? So lastly, Donald Trump rattled the sabers again just this week against CBS. Donald Trump has already filed suit against CBS. Right around the same time he sued the Des Moines Register, he sued CBS. Now, why did he sue CBS? Well, CBS, right before the election in 2024, aired an interview with Kamala Harris. Donald Trump was invited to be interviewed on the same program. He declined. Harris accepted. CBS ran the interview. They explained that Trump had declined. And afterwards, Trump was so angry that Kamala had gotten airtime and he had not, that he sued. So that's what this suit is about. And it made headlines again this week because last Sunday, CBS had 60 Minutes had a broadcast, and there was a segment on there that raised some questions about Trump's Ukraine policy, which, as you know, is quite controversial. And that irked the president. So on Truth Social, which is his preferred social media platform now, he posted about how angry he was about this. And he went on in this very long post to say, hopefully the Federal Communications Commission, as headed by its highly respected chairman, Brendan Carr, will impose maximum fines and punishment. Well, as you know, the Federal Communications Commission handles TV licenses, and Brendan Carr is Trump's own appointee. So that is a very clear threat to a network, and who he's obviously trying to intimidate from running in stories that he doesn't like, stories that raise questions about his policies. And so where does that leave us? I think it leaves us in a pretty dark place when you have a president who is, all of these tactics that I've raised to you are familiar to those of us who have been watching threats to press freedom overseas, from the playbooks of Rodrigo Duterte, from the playbook, who was the dictator of the Philippines, from Viktor Orban of Hungary, and from Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. So when you see this kind of, this is the mutual admiration society that our own president is involved in, it's pretty chilling for press freedom. And so what are we going to do about this? Well, I'm going to keep teaching people to be journalists because I think the most important thing we can do is, and I'm going to keep speaking out. I think it's really important to tell people what's going on and to remind people how important the press is to the constitutional democracy that we have. So for me, I think that's my role. I think for citizens, find a local news organization you like and subscribe, and stand up and speak out when you see freedom of speech being threatened, because it's not just journalists. So sorry I couldn't be more hopeful, but the news is about the truth, not about rose-colored glasses. So that's my report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Do you feel comfortable to field those questions yourself? If you need any help,
Sure.
You can call on me. but
sure. I'm happy to.
go ahead and raise your hand or put something
Or
in
just
the
speak up, yeah, or you can put something in chat, whatever
in
works.
chat. There was one in chat already about other.
Yes, and
Maybe
I did,
just quickly answer that. You may have sort of answered it in some
yeah,
case.
yeah. So UPI is kind of not as, it used to be a big news organization. It doesn't really exist in the same way it used to. But Reuters was kicked out of the press pool when really because the Trump administration didn't want to let AP back in.
Right.
The other big organizations, it's really only the wire services that are in all the time. The other organizations, so the networks, Fox, NBC, CBS, CNN, they rotate. So one day one network's camera person will be in and responsible. The next day it's somebody else. And the print publications, we also rotate, and it's usually been alphabetical. And that was always set by the White House Correspondents Association, but now it's set by the Trump press office. So yeah, it's pretty scary.
I do see a kind of a parallel there in that, academic freedom is universities regulating themselves. The press corps regulate themselves so as not to impose regulation from a political party or something like that. These are the kinds of firewalls that we depended on. They were never perfect, but they were always referred to. And our current regime does not, I don't know, maybe they do pretend to be fair and balanced. I'm not sure, but I think they've even quit talking about that.
I don't, I think, and I want to address Dave's comment that when he listened to VOA, it did sound a lot like propaganda. I think I don't listen to it, because until the internet, you really couldn't listen to VOA at all. I don't know how much VOA has changed. My experience of working with VOA reporters since the 1980s has been that they're pretty professional. And I'll give you one really example that sticks with me is during the first Trump administration, President Erdogan of Turkey came and visited, and he roughed up there were people demonstrating outside the Turkish embassy,
Right.
and his people roughed them up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the VOA had the best video, and Trump loves Erdogan. He doesn't, there's no authoritarian that he doesn't admire, it seems. And he was greeting Erdogan with open arms at the White House, and VOA was running this really rough footage. And so I think they probably do a lot of feature stories that are like, wow, look at how great things are in America. But my experience is they've also run things that are not sort of party line. And that seems to be what a lot of foreigners perceive as well. I mean, it's not like the same kind of propaganda you'd see in a country that has really no free press at all. It may be less edgy than the New York Times or another big domestic publication, but my experience, and I think this probably waxes and wanes and depends on who's running the organization, but there is an actual firewall in writing, and Congress has been pretty, up until recently at least, has been pretty adamant about maintaining that.
Let's hear a question from Kathy Jensen.
I was wondering if press organizations are having any problem finding law firms that will take their cases because of the intimidation that Trump is doing toward law firms.
That's a really good question. At this point, no. But I do think I have seen that happen before. In fact, the lawyer who is currently representing the Associated Press, and whom I know, is works for Ballard Spahr, which is one of the leading First Amendment firms in the country, but he used to work for a different firm, and he quit after the firm refused to take a case against Governor DeSantis because it was afraid it was going to lose business in Florida. So that kind of stuff happens. And again, I absolutely think you're onto something, Kathy, that one of the points of trying to intimidate law firms is to make it very difficult for people who oppose him to get representation.
Yeah.
David Luto asked a point of information that you might have. Has there been any effort to claw back money to a Corporation for Public Broadcasting and other similar kinds of foundations?
We expect that to happen. The story that I alluded to was that this is going to happen, that the Trump administration is planning to ask Congress sometime in the next few weeks to vote on what they call a rescission, which would be taking back money that's already been appropriated for this year, for this fiscal year. And that would be a real, I mean, obviously, like KBIA does not depend totally, thank God, on federal funding, but the more rural an area is, the more their NPR station depends on the feds. So ironically, or maybe not ironically, maybe it's intentional, they're trying to silence NPR in areas where, most of Trump's voters are.
Yeah. I liked your gallery of rogues, Orban and Erdogan and all that, but I can't keep the other one out of my mind here. I listened to Voice of America a lot in the mid 1980s in East Germany, where one of my best friends, one of my only American friends living there, was Timothy Ryback, who's just written a big book that is about a journalist titan named Hugenberg, who helped put Hitler into power. And that brought back a scene in Kiev for me, because I later worked in Ukraine, where the head of Fulbright, herself a journalist, asked me what I thought about Donald Trump. He was just beginning to run. And I said, well, it looks like the press is giving him a very easy time of everything and making him very popular in the way that they're covering her. And she just looked at me like, like I'd cut her to the heart. I think she'd been a professor at Columbia or somewhere. And then admitted that I was right to make that imputation. So I wonder if you have any comments on Ryback's book, which involves the press structure in Germany in the rise of Hitler.
So I haven't read the book, but I would love to read it. So if you would put the title and spell his name in the chat, I will. I'm going to get on that. But to your other comment, did the press enable Trump? Yeah, 100%. Because, and again, if you look back at those Daily News covers that I showed you, one of the things I think, if you look back at the trajectory of kind of our popular culture and journalism over, like, say, since the late 1970s, it's really about, I'll take this off, but what it's really about is how we have changed so that we are much more, sorry, I'm doing something funny with this share here, so let me try to see if I can fix it. Are you seeing me? Or are you seeing something?
Yes,
funky?
we're seeing you.
Good. Okay,
I
good.
took the share down because it was a static screen,
no,
and this way we can see whoever's
Yeah,
speaking.
that's what I wanted to do. Thank you for doing that. Because absent-minded professor here. Anyway, I think we have become, and I honestly think one of the most shocking things to me in the last few months has been the deafening silence from Capitol Hill, because I covered I covered Congress for many, many years, and people from both parties were quite jealous of their role, their constitutional role. And you would always hear from members of Congress, we are a co-equal branch of government. And oftentimes, members of the president's own party would want to make that point to the president. And you're not seeing the same thing. And I wonder why that is. And I think a big part of the problem that we're facing right now is the emasculation of Congress. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. But when I think back to my own journalism career, it was very hard to get stories about Congress in the paper. Because Congress is an institution with 535 faces. And it's much easier in an era of shorter and shorter attention spans to get people to focus on that institution that just has one face. And so I think over the years, a number of things have happened because while we weren't paying attention to Congress, big money swamped it and took over, has had a huge impact in who gets elected to Congress. And the other thing that's had a huge impact is gerrymandering. And, Columbia is a perfect example. I mean, a couple blocks from here is represented by a guy from suburban Kansas City. Where I'm sitting is represented by a guy from suburban St. Louis. If you were to draw a district that keeps Columbia intact, which is really what you should do, it wouldn't be a Democratic district. It would be a competitive district. And a competitive district would elect somebody who was some kind of centrist. And centrists tend to want to work together and compromise. But gerrymandering has altered that. And so when you talk to people who are Trump supporters, or even people who aren't wildly enthused about Trump, but they're not against him, what they'll say is, at least something's getting done. Because things haven't been getting done. Why haven't things been getting done? Because our Congress is so polarized. And I think that's a big part of the problem. But again, to get back to your question, David, guilty. I mean, reporters spent way more, and still do. If you watch cable news at night, you would think there was one elected official in the United States of America. And so I'm really proud of the Columbia Missourian for doing this huge voter guide, really detailed on our municipal elections. We really need to educate people that you need to vote for more than just the president. And thank you for putting that book title in there.
Good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Haven't seen him in decades.
Okay. Yeah. I'm getting that book. Okay. Thank you. I'm writing it down. Anyone else?
Oh,
yeah.
I'll
Go
ask
ahead.
another question. Do you think the reason that, the Biden administration did get a lot of things done, but people didn't seem to be aware of it? Do you think the reason that didn't break through, or why didn't journalists cover that more, the things that were actually done by the Biden administration, do you think?
Well, there was a lot written about Biden having, this amazing history of legislative accomplishment. I don't think, and I certainly think the coverage of Trump has changed a lot. He was a real novelty at the beginning of his first term, and certainly during the 2016 presidential election. And I think that whole novelty, I showed you all the Daily News covers. It's like, wow, this is very readable. It's attention grabbing. And he was an attention grabber. And I think people have gotten a lot more sophisticated about the way they cover Trump. But it's not journalists' fault. It just people tend to say, well, why don't people realize this? It must be the fault of the journalists for not reporting this stuff. And I don't think that's the case here. I think people are reacting to, it's not that they didn't know who Donald Trump was. It's not that they didn't know who Joe Biden was. I think, in terms of Kamala Harris, I covered politics for many, many years, and I'm going to tell you that misogyny is one of the most deep-rooted impulses in our politics. And I hate to say it, but it is, because I'm a woman, it's very difficult for women to, that is a huge burden.
I agree.
And so again, I think there were a lot of people, we live on the San Andreas fault line of political polarization here, and you don't have to go very far to see people who feel left behind because they have been left behind. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and if you're a well-to-do programmer, you're doing really well there. But if you are not, you're not doing very well. So we've become much more a society of haves and have-nots than we were when I was a kid. And I think you're feeling, you're seeing a lot of people who are resentful. And unless and until politicians start to directly tackle that issue, but it's hard, I wish we as journalists had done a better job. But I'm going to tell you, it is very hard to write about systemic problems and get people to read it. We know exactly what we can tell right now. I can go into the Columbia Missourian and there's a machine up there. I can tell you exactly what people are looking at right now and how much time they're spending on the story. And sadly, it is not the carefully reported story on the lack of affordable housing in Columbia. It's going to be some more sensational headline. So part of this is what I call the pogo problem. We have met the enemy and it is us. And part of the problem, I think, or, part of the challenge that's facing us, yes, journalists have to do a better job, but we as citizens have to learn that we need to eat our Wheaties. We need to, in terms of our information diet, where right now, a lot of us, to Dave's point about like anybody can say they're a journalist, and a lot of people are just going online and getting Skittles, Hostess Ho-Hos, and Jujubes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And until we start to get smart and say, how can I get some whole grains into my information diet? And maybe I should look at somebody else's point of view. We need to get out of that filter bubble because we've been gerrymandered too by algorithms. So I think there's a lot of public education that has to be done to it's on all of us as citizens to get our democracy back.
Professor Kiely, this time has gone so quickly. I think we have time for only one more question. Pam, were you ready to ask one?
I've had a couple more that came up, but I do want you to talk about New York Times versus Sullivan. And it just said on CNN, now I forgot, Drake is saying that he was defamed at the halftime of the football game. And so he's suing. And so
yeah, well, so New York Times, and this is going to become increasingly, you'll hear this over and over again. But, under New York Times v. Sullivan, Drake will have a hard time winning a libel case because what New York Times v. Sullivan says is that if you are a public figure, and the most extreme test is for elected officials, it's going to be very hard for you have to prove actual malice in order to say you were libeled. And the reason for that, the Supreme Court at the time said, we want to encourage robust debate and dissent and criticism in our political life. But there's a separate category that Drake would fit into, and he may kind of be almost, because he's expressed some political ambitions too. And so when you start to move into politics, it becomes very hard for you to prove actual malice and libel. If you are a public figure like Drake, it's a little bit easier, but only a scooch easier. If it's any of us on this call, we're going to have a much easier time. And honestly, as journalists, and I teach this in journalism school, it's like, hey, if you're dealing with somebody who has a PR person and they're savvy, that's one set of standards. But if you're dealing with an average citizen who has never dealt with a reporter before, you need to be much more clear about what it means to be interviewed, what this is going to, where this interview is going to appear. And if the person doesn't want to talk or wants to take something back, we're a lot more lenient. And part of that is the libel standard. Part of it's just human decency, but it is, that is the standard. So yes, would Donald Trump like to change that? Yes, he would. He has said he would like to change it. Will he try to find a case to bring to the Supreme Court? Probably. Yeah. And the one thing I will say about all these cases that you need to keep in mind is that even if these cases are frivolous cases, even if ultimately the news media wins, it has cost the news media a lot to defend
Oh,
itself.
yeah. It has.
And that is money that could be going to do stories about affordable housing or whatever. And so that is part of the damage. And, you know, and this is part of the dictator's handbook. Make it so costly to do business that ultimately you go bankrupt or give up. And ultimately, one of the president's cronies buys your news outlet. And the next thing you know, we're Hungary, where, you know, or Middle Europe or Moldova, where all of the news publications are owned by crony capitalists.
Well, always did say they were trying to turn my country into the Soviet Union, but now you're saying it's so bad they're going to turn us into Moldova.
It could be.
Right.
That's really frightening.
Sorry,
And-
you're going to need a martini after this for lunch.
Well, I'm
Just
going to
start day drinking.
suggest
Yeah, right.
we have recorded this, and this goes on our website. Encourage your friends to see professors. Usually we have about twice as many people here. Encourage those people to listen to this really important summary of the state of things right now, which was a little worse than I even imagined.
Yeah.
We thank you for your great caution on this.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the work you do. I think it's important for people to be politically active, so that's really great.
Right. I should know this, but in the journalism school, I am just so proud of it. But I know about the Missouri plan. When you're a freshman, do you go out and do journalism? Or
No, but sophomores do.
sophomores
We send
do?
sophomores out. Yes,
Yes.
yeah. We're very proud of
Okay.
them, and they do great
Yeah.
jobs.
They
So-
really do. We keep running.
And they
into
are not
them.
enemies of the people. They are friends.
No, I know that. I love it when they come
Well, I
around.
think you've
We really
whetted
want to have them come.
you've whetted our appetite to get to know more about the journalism school now. So maybe that's an idea for our programmers.
Okay.
We're not running out of spaces. We're going for the important things right
No.
now. Let me
Good.
tell you, yours was one of the important cautionary tales we'll hear next week
Yeah.
about voting rights. So
Okay.
thank
All
you
right.
so much,
Thank you very
Professor Kathy.
much. All right.
Thank you,
Have a good
Kathy.
meeting. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank
Okay.
you so much, Kathy.